So today we hear not to just forgive 7 times, but 77 times. Jesus uses this hyperbole to remind us that forgiveness is forever, that we too should forgive always, without ceasing. But, it's more than just a numbers game. It's not about, oh, I forgave this guy X amount of times, so I'm good, I can dust my hands and walk off. No. Jesus reminds us the forgiveness must come from the heart. If it doesn't come from the heart, then it's no good. He shares with us at the end of today's gospel parable what happened to that merciless servant. This servant basically was sent to eternal punishment because the master saw that he had no compassion after all the compassion given him. In the catechism, we hear this last phrase of the Lord's Prayer, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And in point 2843, we hear, so also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from your heart. Again, so it has to come from the heart. But how do we forgive from the heart? If you think about it, it's easy to say, oh, I forgive you, but to just say those empty words without them having any substance. The reality is, for us to forgive someone from the heart, we have to know that we have been forgiven first. That we have a certain knowing that we owe a debt to somebody else. Like the servant, if the servant always had in mind the gaze of the master's mercy, I really wonder if the servant would have been able to get upset at his fellow servant. Because remember, the amount that this master forgave was insurmountable to the amount that the servant was owed by his fellow servant. They talk about denarii and talents. Talents, to my understanding, was equivalent to 10,000 denarii. Denarii being a day's wage. And so if you had a certain amount of denarii and a certain amount of talents, it's basically the master forgiving the servant of X amount of talents when the servant was owed X amount of denarii. The two don't even compare. It's a totally different variable that we're concerning. And the reality is the same for us. We think about all the evils in this world, and sometimes we get caught up asking ourselves, why does God allow or permit evil to exist? And why is it that you have all these brothers or sisters who are committing these evils and they're free to do so, and they just keep choosing the worst of rather than promoting what's good? But the beauty is, through this parable we're reminded that God is truly just, that there is total supreme justice in the supernatural reality that we live in. Just because we in our human limitations don't go about living justice doesn't mean that God will not permit whatever to happen under his supreme justice. But he also reminds us that so long as we live out our compassion, by carrying our crosses, by accepting the evils and forgiving over and over again, by truly loving our enemies, we will be showing the world that love is always more powerful than sin. Forgiveness is Jesus' answer to sin. It is the very means in which he conquers sin, the very means in which he destroys death itself. And by us living in and participating in forgiving, we too are participating in that very cross. And what an incredible opportunity for the Lord to find us worthy to carry our crosses with him, to choose for us to carry a cross that is heavy, that is burdensome. Because he's inviting us, giving us an opportunity to glorify, God the Father. One great way of making sure that we forgive is by going to confession first. And when we go to confession, we can always remember how much we owe the Master by how much sins we have committed. This is the beauty of going to frequent confession. It's not that, I haven't committed any mortal sins in the last week or two, so I'm good. But rather, by constantly reminding ourselves how much we owe the Master, so that when we engage with the other servants, we don't count the petty cash and how much is owed to one another. We can overlook that because we're constantly reminded how much we sin and how much we depend on the Master. So long as we stay faithful to this, we receive the grace of knowing of God's love. And when we know His love, truly anything that we do will be enlightened by His compassion. So let's take it from today's gospel and let us be faithful to being humble servants. Servants that always keep in mind the debt that we owe to God the Father. That we may continue to persevere in trying to glorify Him in gratitude, knowing that it's not possible for us to pay back all that we owe. But by doing these little deeds, we can show Him our gratitude for Him through His Son, Jesus Christ, having forgiven us and brought us to eternal salvation. So, at Noon Chepi, here we go. Here's another week. See you next week.